Hi everybody, it's Kara here with SCZ Live, and I'm so excited to be in the Venomous Gallery extension with my friend Michelle, who is a zookeeper over here, and she's going to tell us about some of the new species that we have.
Hey everyone, so if you haven't been to the zoo since we've opened back up, we have a ton of brand new venomous exhibits. So for this gallery, we went for smaller animals, so just to show a different variety of the venomous snakes that are around the world. So this exhibit here is our Armenia themed exhibit. So we have our Armenian vipers, which we do conservation work with in Armenia. So that's the gray and orange guy over on the left. These guys are vipers, so that means that they have folding fangs and they have hemotoxic venom, which means that it affects your blood, and also it can cause a lot of tissue damage. So the other snake is the Levantine viper. So again, another viper, so they have similar venoms. And these guys also live in Armenia. They have a much larger range than the Armenian viper, but they can be found in the same areas. So these guys are just so cool. I love these snakes so much.
I think that these are a great snake for us to have here on site, because this is a conservation project that we participate in with boots on the ground, and we also give money to that project too, right?
Yes, that's correct. So we actually go to Armenia. So I had the chance to go to Armenia this past fall. And so we did some research there. We were doing population studies. So we would go out into the hills, into the areas where the vipers den in the winter. So since it gets very cold in Armenia, so the vipers will spend about 6 months hibernating. So we went there at a time when they would be going back into their dens. So we would go out and look for the vipers. When we found them, we would record the coordinates where we found them. We would take their lengths, we'd take their weights. If they didn't already have a microchip in them, just like a pet's microchip, we would give them one. And then we'd just let them go again.
We have a really good question.
Okay.
Our friend Lana wants to know, when you clean the enclosures, how do you move these guys out?
Okay, that is a great question. So snakes here, we will use hooks to move them around. So a hook is just kind of like a golf club with a little hook on the end. And so this allows us to just scoop up the snake without having to physically touch them. So we can just scoop them out and put them in a secure bucket. So we'll put them in a bucket, put a lid on it, move the other snake if there's more than one snake. So that way all of the animals are secure, we know where their heads are, we know where their fangs are, and then we can work in the exhibit without the snakes in there.
Right, and I think it's really important to point out that you guys are really deft with those hooks. You know how to use them properly, and you work quickly so that you're not distressing the snake. If I were asked to use a snake hook to move a venomous snake that I was already scared of, I wouldn't be able to do it.
It does take some practice, and some snakes are much easier to move than others. Some snakes, these guys aren't too bad, but occasionally you'll get species that just they just don't want to be on the hook.
Yeah.
So they're either just going and going and going, or there are some that'll just flop off of the hook. So it can be a little challenging, but the important thing is just to remember to just take your time, just kind of let the snake do what it's going to do. So these guys are ectotherms, so that means that they can't produce their own body heat. But that kind of works to our advantage in this situation because they tire out a lot quicker than a mammal would.
Oh, I never thought of that.
Yeah, so sometimes, especially with like arboreal snakes that are in trees like mambas, if you just let them cruise around the trees for, 5-10 minutes, they're going to get tired, and eventually you're going to be able to easily pull them out.
Well, that's very cool.
So shall we move on to some more
let's see what else we've got, because we've got a bunch of fun stuff.
Yes. So this guy is a Mexican pygmy rattlesnake. So they are obviously found in Mexico, as their name suggests. They live in southern Mexico at high elevations, so about 5,000 feet or higher. So that's like way up in the mountains.
Yeah.
And they are so tiny. Their rattles are just the tiniest I've ever seen in my life. And they almost sound like kind of like a bee or a fly buzzing, not like that typical rattlesnake that we think of. So they are related to rattlesnakes in the U.S. They are pit vipers, so you can actually see with him, he's got those little dots under his eyes. So those are heat-sensing pits. So these guys can actually kind of see in infrared. So that's something that we can't do. So they use that to find their food. So these guys are pretty much just going to eat mammals. They get small mice here at the zoo. And since they live at higher elevations, since the area is colder, it's going to be easier to see that food since they're going to be eating endotherms like us. So mammals make our own body heat.
Right, so the contrast is going to be more.
Yes.
These guys are super active right now. Is there any, because they live at a higher elevation, do you keep their exhibit temperature lower, or do you keep everybody pretty constant?
So everybody in here is going to have kind of a constant temperature. Now, for some of these snakes, if we do breed them, if they do live at those higher elevations, they may need to go through a cooling cycle. So like with the Armenian vipers, these guys would also be cooled for a couple months. And so with ectotherms, like these guys, a lot of times their breeding cues are completely environmentally based.
Right.
So they may need, this cooling cycle. Some need like a rainy season versus a dry season. So it really depends on where in the world they live.
Wow, they are so active today.
They are.
The one in the front, the one in the back got over it and went back to bed.
Can you see this guy? Oh, he's up behind the rock, of course.
But I don't see him at all. Sorry, everybody, I wasn't paying attention.
Way up there. You can
we can't.
just kind of see the top of him. But he's a black-tailed horned pit viper. And they also live at higher elevations, not quite as high as the rattlesnakes. But they do cross over a little bit. So again, they're like a rocky species, and they're another type of pit viper. And they're named because we can't see it right now, but they've got little scales that protrude above their eyeballs, so they kind of look like horns.
Oh, very cool. So if this were an actual snake, I'm gonna have a hard time pointing and doing the camera at the same time, but where am I even at? Okay, so his tail actually really begins like right in here, doesn't it?
Yeah, I would say just about there.
People don't realize that snakes are really long animals with really short tails.
Yeah, and it does depend on the species. We do have some species with longer tails, but typically a terrestrial species or a species that lives on the ground, they're going to have pretty short tails because they don't need them to balance as much. So pretty much the snake's body is head, body is really long, and then the tail's at the very end. Well, this guy is a Cape coral cobra.
I was super excited because I got to see it the other day when I came by, but do you see it now?
Let's see.
It's really hard to discern when I'm looking at the screen.
Yeah, he is hiding really
well. That's okay.
They're another snake that likes to hide. So they like to live in burrows or under rocks, and they're a desert species, and so they're nocturnal because it gets really, really hot during the day. A lot of their prey is going to come out at night. So they typically, these guys actually prey on lizards, mostly in the wild. So different types of snakes like to eat different types of food, just like people do. So these guys primarily are going to eat lizards and other ectotherm animals. So these guys are related to cobras. So kind of the group of venomous snakes they're in is called elapids. So that means that they have a neurotoxic venom. So this type of venom is going to affect your nervous system. It's going to make it really hard for you to breathe. So it's not going to be as painful of a bite as with the vipers that are doing a lot of tissue damage, but is also could be just as dangerous because if you can't breathe, you can't get any oxygen.
Right, you're going down.
Yeah, yeah.
Who we have here? This one is beautiful.
Yes. So this is a Taylor's cantil, and cantils are actually related to copperheads that we find here in the U.S. and in Kansas. So these guys are from northern Mexico, so we've got a lot of Mexican species here. And again, they're another type of pit viper, so another hemotoxic venom. But these guys also really are related to water moccasins, which are not found in Kansas. But you can kind of see like the head shape and the body shape similar.
Right. Amazing. Well, let's take a look at one more. Which one do you want to show us? I want it to be your favorite.
Okay. We can go over and do the twig snakes.
Okay.
Because they're completely different, but they're also so
They
cool.
are amazing because I stood here and it for a good 45 seconds before I found one the other day, and then I was like, oh, there you are. So I'm going to give them a chance out there in Facebook land. I can see it, but I know what I'm looking for now.
Yeah. So these are twig snakes. There are 2 of them in the exhibit, and of course they get their names from looking pretty much exactly like twigs.
Right.
So they are a venomous species, but the really cool thing about these guys is that they are considered rear-fanged. So like we already talked about, the vipers have a folding fang and hemotoxic venom. Have a fixed fang and neurotoxic venom. So these guys, their fangs are actually located right beneath their eyes, and they don't have a hollow fang like other venomous snakes. Instead, it's grooved, so they have to chew.
The way the Gila monster does.
Right, exactly. You see that guy up at the top, he was kind of doing a little head bob.
No, I didn't see him at all. I was totally fixated on the other one. Thanks for the heads up.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah, so he was doing like a little head bob, just kind of like bobbing in the breeze like a twig would. So they have grooved fangs. And historically, rear-fanged snakes weren't considered dangerous. So they used not be considered dangerous to humans because they typically wouldn't bite, or their fangs were just too small to really get venom into a person. That was disproved with a number of species by a number of people. So these guys do have medically significant bites. And they have hemotoxic venom too, so it's going to affect your blood and it's going to affect your muscles, just like the vipers. Maybe if we...
There we go. Okay, guys, we know that we're starting to have some technical difficulties. This is a concrete building, and sometimes connectivity gets a little shady up here. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up, and I just want to tell Michelle, we didn't get done because there's a gazillion interesting things here, but I want to tell Michelle thank you so much, and I want to remind everybody that we do have July in-person classes for kids and teens. If you go to our website, you can find out more about those. We'd love to see you here so that you can learn